It's a story that's becoming as common as the Ukraine war is long. Russia attempts an assault and Ukraine crushes it. This time, Russia wanted to launch an attack on Lyman, which is one of Ukraine's fortress cities in the Donetsk Oblast. We say wanted to because Russia didn't even make it close enough to launch the assault in the first place. Ukraine stopped Vladimir Putin's forces in their tracks. Ukraine brilliantly outsmarted Putin with a multifaceted counter-assault that crushed Russia's Lyman assault before it even started. On October 4th, Euromaidan Press reported on a brilliant series of Ukrainian strikes near the Lyman front that combined air, artillery, and drone assaults to great effect. Russia's plan, as it has been for months, was to try to cross a vital river that could provide its troops with a direct route into Lyman. The entire Russian assault hinged on this crossing, and Ukraine cut them off at the pass. No matter how hard Russia tried, Ukraine's systematic approach of cutting river crossings and then destroying Russia's reserves before they could amass for other assaults or attempt future crossings has stopped Russia in its tracks. Lyman still stands, and if Russia's strategy doesn't evolve, it'll stand for a very long time. That's not what Putin wants, because Lyman has been on his radar since the beginning of his invasion. The city was one of many that Putin's forces managed to overrun during the chaos at the beginning of the invasion. Ukraine, caught off guard, wasn't able to prevent Russia's brief occupation of Lyman. The country's forces withdrew, gathering their strength for a concerted counteroffensive that started to push the Russian lines back. It took Ukraine a while to reach Lyman again, but when it did, Russia could do nothing to stop Ukraine from reclaiming the vital Donetsk city. By October 1, 2022, media outlets including The Guardian were reporting on Russian troops being forced to pull out of Lyman. Ukraine's counteroffensives had brought it to within touching distance of the city's borders. Putin's forces had to make the difficult choice of remaining as they were encircled, which would have meant certain death, or withdrawing to find another place from which to assault, which was sure to anger Putin. The Russian troops chose the latter option, with Russia's Ministry of Defense later trying to dress the withdrawal up as a move to more advantageous frontiers, The Guardian reports. That wasn't what it was. Russia's entire contingent of around 5,000 soldiers had been pushed out by Ukraine, and they haven't been able to retake the city in the 3 years since. Back in 2022, the spokesperson for Ukraine's eastern forces, Zherebets, outlined why Lyman's retaking was such a huge victory for Ukraine. Lyman is important because it's the next step towards the liberation of the Ukrainian Donbass. It's an opportunity to go further to Crimea and to Severodonetsk, and it's psychologically very important, Zherebets said. Apply the inverse to that statement and you see why Putin wants Lyman so much. In February 2024, the BBC reported on the situation in Lyman, noting that the city was half-ruined and strategically important for its mass of railway connections. Granted, those railway connections have been half destroyed by Russia, leaving broken rails and cables behind. However, Ukraine knew in 2024, as it knows now, that Russia would try to repair those rails to aid its logistics in the Donetsk region. Everything that Putin's war machine does inside Ukraine relies on rails, the Iron Leviathan. As the International Center for Defense and Security dubbed Russia's rail network in December 2024, carries everything: troops, equipment, supplies, even citizens. It all comes via rail, and Lyman is as important a rail hub as any in the Donbass. Taking Lyman means Russia getting its hands on a major railway junction, and that would take Putin one step closer to seizing Donetsk. In October 2025, Russia is still trying to take Lyman. The latest attempt at an attack, Euromaidan Press reports, saw Russian commanders start to organize a classic assault that would combine tanks, artillery, and infantry. Together, these three parts of the assault would rush Lyman, reaching the outskirts of the city before bedding in. With a foothold established, that initial wave of troops and equipment could then hold the line as the reinforcements arrived. Infiltration groups would funnel through this foothold and enter Lyman itself, operating under the radar of defenders to weaken Ukraine's hold on this key Donetsk city. Massive armored formations were moved into staging areas to prepare for this massive combined assault. However, Russia had a problem, and it's the same problem Russia has had ever since Ukraine managed to push it out of Lyman in October 2022, the Zherebets River. An assault on Lyman isn't possible until a reliable route is created over that river. Pontoon bridges are Russia's solution. These temporary floating structures are supposed to hold long enough for Russian forces to get across, and Russia has been forcing its engineers to work day and night to build them. If Russia were able to keep all of this activity under the radar, it might have had a chance of succeeding, but that's not what happened. Russia is trying to operate in a territory where Ukraine's drones fill the skies. Ukraine has eyes on everything, and it spotted Russia's attempts to amass a large force for a full-scale assault on Lyman long before Russia was prepared to attempt that assault. The pontoon bridges weren't complete. Russia didn't have all of its forces in place to execute its plan. Ukraine knew what Russia had planned from the start, and over the last few days, it has launched a series of strikes that have destroyed Russia's assaulting forces before they ever even had a chance to do what they were supposed to do. This wasn't a counterattack. It was a carefully planned and extremely precise demolition of Putin's ambitions that was made possible when Ukraine's 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade arrived to completely change the complexion of the battle for Lyman. That brigade, combined with Ukraine's aerial assets and drone operators, launched a combined assault of its own that easily overcame the combined offensive that Russia had planned. The pontoon bridges were Ukraine's first target. Bridging is an often underappreciated, though extremely vital, aspect of the Ukraine war. Writing for Forbes in December 2024, Vikram Mittal made that point. At the time, Mittal claimed that bridging would shape the battle lines for the winter to come. His point was pertinent, and it applies to Lyman and the Zherebets River just as much in the fall of 2025 as it did back then. Speaking about the rivers that crisscross Ukraine, Mittal wrote, "These rivers act as natural barriers to heavy military vehicles, and many bridges have already been targeted and destroyed. Consequently, the outcome of this phase of the war will partly depend on each side's ability to conduct effective military bridging operations." That answers the question of why Russia has been building pontoon bridges over the Zherebets River. Every existing crossing has long since been destroyed. If it hadn't been, it would be an obvious kill zone for Ukraine's drones to roam, as well as a point on which artillery fire could be focused. Existing bridges are out of the question, so Russia has to build floating pontoons in a desperate effort to get its forces closer to Lyman. Ukraine destroyed those pontoons without mercy when it struck against Russia's budding offensive. Writing for Euromaidan Press, David Axe said that Ukraine found itself engaged in a deadly game of whack-a-bridge. Russia's engineers kept on trying to build the pontoons. Ukraine spotted and then destroyed them. Axe noted that a group of 5 Russian regiments was attempting to surround Lyman, though all would need to cross the Zherebets River before they'd stand a chance. Ukraine's geography is clearly playing a massive role, and the Ukrainian military took advantage with a series of airstrikes against the Russian pontoons throughout the first few days of October. Getting across the Zherebets River would give Russian forces a clear shot at Lyman, Axe wrote. To guard itself against that shot, Euromaidan Press reports, Ukraine has already destroyed at least 5 of the pontoon bridges Russia was building. It cites geolocated footage captured close to Balka Zaravka, which is on the other side of the river and currently occupied by Russia. Pontoon bridges were being erected, and Ukraine took them down using airstrikes. It launched a pair of bombs at each bridge to double the damage and ensure the strikes were still successful even if one of the bombs happened to miss its target. The operation has set Russia's preparations for an assault on Lyman back by several days, if not a number of weeks, as Ukraine destroyed vital bridging equipment. With that equipment gone, the Russian forces amassing on the other side of the river have to wait until more supplies arrive. No one knows when those supplies will reach Putin's troops, but when they do, you can almost guarantee that Ukraine will have the same response for them. Ukraine's weapon of choice when taking out the 5 Russian pontoons was the GBU-39. These precision bombs can be fired from Ukraine's F-16s, and thanks to a few clever modifications, are also compatible with its MiG-29 fighter jets. That leaves Ukraine with plenty of options when it wants to launch strikes using GBU-39s. This is also one of the Western weapons that Ukraine has in solid supply. Back in October, Militarny reported that the US had placed a $6.9 billion order to cover the production and delivery of an unspecified number of GBU-39s, with Ukraine being one of the main recipients of the weapon. Of course, this doesn't mean that Ukraine now has an absolute abundance of GBU-39s. The American order covers production of this bomb up to December 31, 2035. As for how many GBU-39s Ukraine is going to receive, we don't know the answer to that question. We do know that the bomb has a unit cost of around $40,000, thanks to the United States Air Force's official website. This tells us that a $6.9 billion investment into manufacturing these bombs should produce somewhere in the region of 172,500. Ukraine will hope that a large number of these GBU-39s will reach its shores. After all, the bomb is perfect for taking out everything from pontoon bridges to Russian command posts and equipment. A guided munition, also referred to as a small-diameter bomb, the GBU-39 has an extended range and can be fired day or night in all weather conditions. Using GPS to navigate to its target, a single GBU-39 carriage is capable of carrying up to 4 250-pound guided air-to-surface munitions that can be launched from fighter jets and bombers. This isn't a huge bomb. The US Air Force even lauds that fact, stating that the weapon's compact nature allows fighter jets to carry more GBU-39s than they would be able to carry heavier or larger bombs. However, the GBU-39 makes up for its relative lack of power with extreme precision, making it a great choice for taking out fixed or stationary targets. Russia's pontoon bridges are the perfect example. Though temporary, these bridges don't move around once they're in place. They'll be there for as long as Russia needs them or until Ukraine destroys them. Thanks to the GBU-39's range of 40 nautical miles, which is equivalent to about 74 kilometers, Ukraine can fairly safely send its fighter jets into range of Russia's pontoons, allowing them to unleash their payloads with minimal risk of anti-air fire. A pontoon bridge isn't exactly the most hardened structure in the world. A double dose of GBU-39s for each of Russia's bridges was more than enough to take them out of the Lyman equation. Ukraine could have stopped there, and it would have been enough, at least for a few days. All of the hard work that Russia's engineers put into building the pontoons was undone, and it would be a while before they could be rebuilt. However, Ukraine knows that a massive Russian force awaits on the other side of the Zherebets River, so Ukraine did the smart thing. It went on the attack. Ukraine started hitting Russian tanks at around the same time that it was taking out the pontoon bridges. Specifically, Ukraine deployed first-person view or FPV drones to strike any Russian tanks that were seen moving toward the Lyman front line, Euromaidan press reports. We don't know how many of Russia's tanks Ukraine managed to take out with these drone strikes. Presumably, any that were in range and sight of Ukraine's FPV drones got taken out. According to Euromaidan press, Ukraine did manage to score a direct hit on a T-90M just outside the village of Terny. Putin loves this tank. The most modern in Russia's arsenal, the T-90M has been lauded by Putin himself as the very best in the world, the National Interest reported in April 2024. It isn't. Russia had lost almost 100 of these tanks by that point, the outlet said, and the tank has the same vulnerabilities to drone strikes as Russia's older Soviet-era tanks. Still, another T-90M down is a good result for Ukraine's drone operators near Lyman because it means one less piece of armor Russia can use to launch the offensive that it has planned. That's one more tank to add to the more than 11,200 that Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says Russia has lost since Putin launched his invasion. Ukraine's Lyman-based drone operators haven't solely focused on tanks. For its planned combined assault, Russia needs plenty of artillery. Assuming it can get this artillery over the Zherebets River, Russia will use it to shell the remains of Lyman and, Putin hopes, finally push Ukraine back out. Ukraine's drone operators are trying to ensure that can't happen by taking advantage of Russia's forced standstill to destroy as many of its artillery units as possible. On October 5th, UKR Inform reported that drone operators from Ukraine's 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade managed to destroy several of Russia's artillery guns. The Signum Battalion of the brigade took to Telegram to report its success, stating, "Pilots from the Signum Battalion carried out strikes on enemy artillery guns. 4 units were destroyed. 3 of them had been hidden in dugouts and under camouflage nets, but our drones located and struck them. The 4th artillery gun was active, its barrel in combat-ready position. We don't allow that. A precise drone hit directly into the barrel disabled another weapon." That's another 4 artillery systems to add to the 33,400 plus that Russia has lost. Ukraine's drone operators have been busy and effective in the Lyman direction. That covers 2 aspects of Ukraine's combined strikes against Russia's Lyman forces. Ukraine's airstrikes decimated Russia's pontoon bridges, making crossing the Zherebets River impossible, at least for the time being. And with its drones, Ukraine took on any tank that was in range, eventually claiming a major symbolic scalp by once again taking out Russia's best tank in the world with a tiny drone that would have cost a fraction of the tank's price to build. However, you may remember that we mentioned the arrival of a certain group to Lyman that has changed the entire dynamic of this embattled sector. That group is the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade, and as the name implies, it's brought something that Ukraine has been missing in Lyman, an artillery counterpunch that deals with Russia's own artillery. Euromaidan press says the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade is a new brigade Ukraine appears to have created specifically to augment the Ukrainian 3rd Army Corps operating in Lyman. It's also one of the first Ukrainian artillery brigades to sport Ukraine's own Bogdana self-propelled artillery systems, which are now operating alongside the other tube artillery systems Ukraine had before the war. The arrival of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade places significantly more sustained firepower directly to the Lyman sector, able to engage river approaches, road nodes, and staging areas repeatedly and accurately, while moving away before being hit by Russian counter-battery strikes, Euromaidan press reports. That's terrible news for Putin. It doesn't take a genius to work out that organizing a mass assault requires the accumulation of, well, mass. Tanks, armored vehicles, troops, and supplies all need to be grouped together. Now that Ukraine has artillery, it's able to launch accurate strikes against any Russian groupings that it locates. Add the portability of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade's artillery into the mix, and you get what is sure to be a clear pattern about to emerge in the Lyman direction. Russia will amass troops and equipment near where it intends to cross the Zherebets River. Ukraine will batter these positions with artillery as soon as it locates them, along with using airstrikes and drones to take out pontoons and deal precise damage against Russia's armor. There is no safe route into Lyman for Russia's forces anymore. Euromaidan Press adds that geolocated footage from the Lyman sector shows that Ukraine's artillery coverage now spans every possible approach route Russia could use to breach the city. That's huge for Ukraine, the outlet says. Before the arrival of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade, Ukraine had to rely on its aircraft and drones to conduct both reconnaissance and strikes against Russia's Lyman-focused forces. Now artillery has been added into the mix, and it brings with it the ability to constantly shell any location where Russia attempts to create a pontoon bridge or build up a mass of troops. Drones will handle the precise strikes, fighter jets loaded with GBU-39s will take out any Russian structure that gets a little too close to being completed, and artillery helps to shorten Ukraine's detection-to-engagement chain, allowing it to hit faster and harder as soon as reconnaissance drones spot Russia's crews attempting to do anything. Geography plays a huge role in making Lyman a fortress. With this combined approach, Ukraine may have just made this fortress impenetrable. Russia now has very few offensive options for taking on Lyman. Amassing a large concentration of troops and equipment in preparation for a large assault may have worked earlier in the war, but now Ukraine has far too many tools to deal with this kind of approach. Layered strikes are now taking out any Russians who attempt a Zherebets River crossing. Assuming Ukraine's defenses hold, meaning its troops have to remain well supplied, Lyman isn't going to fall anytime soon. Russian warships in Russian waters are supposed to be safe. That's what the Kremlin has always thought. Of course, those in the Black Sea are another story. They've been targeted constantly by Ukraine, and now that Ukraine has drones and missiles, Russia could almost expect that. But there could be no attack on a Russian ship outside of those contested waters, right? Wrong. Ukraine just pulled off a stunning long-range strike that has deprived Russia of one of its newest warships. Putin's navy now knows it's defenseless against Ukraine's long-range attacks, as Ukraine has just struck a warship in Russia's safe zone. On October 4th, United 24 reported the basics of the strike. It says that Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, or SSO, have managed to use a long-range weapon to score a direct hit on a Russian ship named the Grad, one of Russia's Bayan-M-class missile destroyers. The Grad is the exact sort of ship that Vladimir Putin would love to have in the Black Sea, but it'll never make it there. The Grad will never make it anywhere anymore, as Ukraine has managed to strike it at a staggering distance of almost 1,000 kilometers, which is around 620 miles, from its own borders. Russia's ship was in the supposedly safe waters of Lake Onega, which is in northwest Russia's Republic of Karelia, when it was struck. Russia could never have seen this coming. While Ukraine has enjoyed plenty of success with its strikes against Russia's oil refineries in recent months, those are massive and static targets that are ideal for such strikes. But a ship, a missile cruiser that is supposed to be relatively agile and capable of avoiding strikes from a distance, this shouldn't have happened. But it did, and the SSO is more than happy to tell the world what it's achieved. Taking to Telegram in the wake of scoring its direct hit on the Grad, the SSO provided much more information. At 0431 on October 4, 2025, as a result of successful actions of one of the units of the Special Operations Forces, the small missile ship Grad, hull number 575, of Project 21631, Bayan-M, was hit in Lake Onega, Republic of Karelia, the SSO said. This was an early morning attack, but it wasn't designed to take the static ship offline. The Grad was active, and it was on the move. The missile carrier was sailing from the Baltic to the Caspian Sea, the SSO adds. The strike hit the right part of the ship's engine compartment. Further details are being clarified. You may wonder why a ship en route to a sea that doesn't directly impact the Ukraine war would have been targeted. It's unlikely that the Grad, even with its assortment of missiles, could do any serious damage to Ukraine from a sea that's so far. But maybe this wasn't about taking out a threat. Perhaps Ukraine wanted to send a message to Russia. We have long-range weapons, and we can take out some of your most valuable naval assets from hundreds of miles away. After all, this is far from the first time that Ukraine has hit a vessel in or around the Caspian Sea. On August 14th, Ukraine also hit the Port Olaya 4, which is a Russian cargo vessel. at a range of about 640 kilometers or just under 400 miles. That strike caused fire damage to the Port Elia 4, causing the ship to submerge slightly. It didn't sink, but Ukraine didn't need it to. This strike may have been a test of what was to come about a month and a half later, with the attack likely being related to Ukraine's campaign to disrupt Russia's military supply lines. The Grad going down could do the same. It also deprives the Russian Navy of one of its newest vessels. Theoretically, the Grad would be in a better state of repair than most of Russia's other ships. Maybe Putin even had designs on sending it into the Black Sea, or maybe the Grad was heading to the Caspian Sea to resupply before heading back to the Baltic Sea, where it could terrorize Ukraine's European allies. Again, we don't know, but it also doesn't matter, as the Grad is now likely out of commission. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this strike is the sheer distance Ukraine's weapons covered to hit the Grad. This leads us to the obvious question: what did Ukraine use? The SSO isn't telling anybody, likely to prevent Russia from figuring out exactly how Ukraine conducted the attack. The less information that Russia has, the less likely it is that Russia will come up with a counter if Ukraine wants to follow the same blueprint for future strikes. Having said all of that, there are only two types of weapons in Ukraine's arsenal that might have been capable of carrying out a strike like this: drones and missiles. A long-range strike using a drone seems like the most likely route the SSO took to hit the Grad, especially given that Ukraine has long-range drones in abundance. We know that Ukraine has drones that can travel for almost 1,000 kilometers. The country's digital transformation minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, said as much in April 2024. His comments came in the wake of a spate of Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil refineries, leading him to state, "Most of the drones that attack Russian oil refineries have a range of 700 to 1,000 kilometers, but now there are models that can fly over 1,000 kilometers." Fedorov didn't elaborate on any specific drones at that point, though he did say that Ukraine had 10 companies involved in the production and continued advancement of these 1,000-kilometer-plus drones. One Ukrainian drone that we know was in service for sure at the time of Fedorov's comments was the UJ-26 Beaver. Also known as the Beaubear, this drone has a canard layout, inverted tail, and a sleek fuselage that makes it look almost like a mini version of a commercial jet. Its range is around the 1,000-kilometer mark. However, its 20-kilogram payload, which amounts to about 44 pounds, isn't the most impressive that Ukraine's drones bring to the table. Still, the drone was introduced in 2023, and Ukraine has used it to hit Moscow and several other targets deep inside Russia. Perhaps the Grad was the Beaver's latest victim. The Lyuchi is another potential option. Referred to as Ukraine's answer to Russia's Shahid drones by Vikram Mittal, in an August 2024 article for Forbes, the Lyuchi has an effective range of at least 1,000 kilometers. Upgraded versions have doubled that range. The drone can also carry a payload that's nearly 4 times the size of the Beaver's, and with an estimated cost of around $200,000 per unit, the Lyuchi is cost-effective enough that Ukraine might have decided to risk it on a long-range mission to take out a Russian warship. It's certainly effective enough to cause a decent amount of damage, as proven by Ukraine having carried out 80% of its oil refinery strikes up to the midpoint of 2024 using the Lyuchi. Ultimately, we don't know which drone Ukraine used, if it used a drone at all. However, we know that it's building these types of long-range drones in bulk. In July 2024, Militani confirmed that by sharing quotes from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. "We have really increased the production of drones," Zelensky said in July 2024. "Their range is now 1,000 kilometers plus. That is, there are 1,000, 1,200, and 1,300 kilometers, but we must understand that this is a drone, and its power is much less than that of a missile." Speaking of missiles, that brings us to the second possible weapon that Ukraine could have used. Western missiles are out of the question for the SSO's October 4th strike on the Grad. The US would never approve the use of an ATACMS in the Caspian Sea, and the UK would likely take the same approach with its Storm Shadow missiles. Not that it would matter, neither can strike anywhere near far enough to have been used against the Grad. However, Ukraine has developed an impressive defense industry since Russia invaded, and that industry has pumped out a couple of missiles that could have pulled off the strike. The best candidate is the Long Neptune, which is an upgraded version of Ukraine's R-360 Neptune missile. Long Neptune is capable of traveling anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 kilometers. Better yet, the R-360, on which it's based, is an anti-ship cruise missile that Ukraine has used to take out Russia's ships in the Black Sea. However, the Long Neptune is meant to be a very different beast. Despite being based on an anti-ship cruise missile, Long Neptune is designed to hit ground targets. Still, the Ukraine Crisis Media Center says that Long Neptune doesn't differ too much from its anti-ship cousin. The nose, cone, and tail section have not been modified, it reports. The wing and tail surfaces have been enlarged, presumably to balance the higher takeoff weight. With so few differences, perhaps there's a chance that Long Neptune is as capable of destroying Russian ships as the R-360 Neptune. If it is, Ukraine isn't saying. And that could play to Ukraine's advantage, keep Russia guessing, and counters to Ukraine's missiles are harder to develop. There's also the latest headline-grabbing Ukrainian weapon to consider. The Flamingo is a cruise missile drone hybrid that Missile Matters says is capable of traveling up to 3,000 kilometers. That's similar to the top end of the Long Neptune's range, though the Flamingo differs in terms of sheer firepower. With a 1.15 metric ton payload, the Flamingo packs a very heavy punch. Too heavy perhaps for that punch to be expended on a small missile cruiser that isn't even a direct threat to Ukraine. That's what makes both of these missiles less likely candidates than Ukraine's drones. Both may be capable, at least when it comes to range, but with Ukraine trying to maximize its wartime assets, it seems wiser to go with a low-cost drone than a more expensive missile, the latter of which could be used to destroy a Russian oil refinery or devastate a troop gathering inside Ukraine. The only thing that's certain is that the SSO isn't telling us what it used. It's more concerned with the target that it just hit. The hit Grad is one of the newest and most modern flagships of the Russian Federation, commissioned into the Russian Baltic Fleet on December 29, 2022, the SSO says in its Telegram statement. The ship's main armament is the Caliber NK missile system. Those are two very important pieces of information. First, when it comes to newness, the Grad was right up there with the most recent entries into Russia's navy. Bear in mind that this is a navy that's struggling to produce any new ships at the moment due to the pressure of Western sanctions. We'll dig into what those sanctions are doing later in the video. But before that, the mention of the Grad's main weapon may offer some insight into why Ukraine chose this ship specifically, beyond sending messages about its long-range capabilities and its ability to hit Russia's newest ships. Also known as the 3M14 Caliber, the Caliber NK is a land attack cruise missile that has a range of between 1,500 and 2,500 kilometers. That's roughly equivalent to between 932 and 1,553 miles, with the latter of those ranges meaning the Grad could technically hit Odessa from the Caspian Sea. Should such a strike happen, the Caliber NK would deliver a 450-kilogram warhead, which is equivalent to 992 pounds. Conventional versions of the missile use a high-explosive warhead. However, Missile Threat says that there's a possibility that the Caliber NK is nuclear capable. Ukraine taking a ship that can fire these missiles out of commission is a major victory in that context, no matter where the ship was when it was hit. If the Grad has been sunk, and we don't know yet if it has been, Ukraine will also be delighted that some of these terrifying missiles have gone down with it. Beyond the potential impact of this particular missile, RBC Ukraine says that the Grad belongs to a small fleet of Russian missile and artillery ships that were purpose-built to serve in coastal and inland waters. It's a River Sea class of vessel with a guided missile system that is one of the 12 Bayan-M-class ships that are supposed to protect Russia's internal maritime interests. In addition to Caliber cruise missiles, the Grad can also fire anti-ship missiles at naval targets, along with Zircon and Onyx cruise missiles, the latter of which the Grad fires from a vertical launch system capable of holding 8 missiles. The ship is rounded out with a 30mm duet system, which is automatic and features a pair of 6-barrel cannons, plus several machine guns and 2 rocket launchers. But this particular class of ship also has a weakness. It has practically no air defenses. October 4th saw the SSO take advantage of that fact. A missile ship that was designed to hit targets on land and counter threats at sea had no answer for the drone or missile that Ukraine sent flying its way. The SSO hit its target. Now the Grad, along with its impressive loadout, isn't going to be causing any issues for anybody apart from Russia anymore. The SSO hitting the Grad was a major attack on a day in which Ukraine unleashed hell on Russia, Euromaidan Press adds in its report on the strike. Overnight, Ukraine also unleashed an attack against the Kuryshin Nefteyorg Syntez oil refinery in Russia's Leningrad region. That's one more added to a series of refinery strikes that have deprived Russia of around 40% of its refining capacity over the last couple of months. This particular refinery is one of the largest in Russia, with the loss of its 18.4 million-ton annual capacity adding another blow that limits Russia's gasoline and diesel stockpiles. Ukraine also conducted a strike in Kursk on the same day as the Grad attack. Euromaidan Press says that Ukraine's general staff has confirmed that it hit a transporter-loaded vehicle Russia uses for launching its Iskander ballistic missiles, along with the Garmon radar complex. So October 4th was a productive day for Ukraine. Here's why it was also an important day. As we mentioned earlier, it's unlikely that the Grad represented any real threat to Ukraine. Though it has missiles that could hit some parts of Ukraine from the Caspian Sea, those missiles would have to travel a long way and break through Ukraine's air defenses to have any sort of impact. Still, this is one more of Russia's missile ships that has just been taken out of commission, and that's no small accomplishment. Ukraine's effectiveness in the Black Sea has led to Russia practically withdrawing the entire fleet that it had stationed there. A third of the Black Sea fleet is done and dusted, with the rest having retreated to what Russia hopes are safer waters. With that fleet functionally inactive, as the Atlantic Council puts it, Ukraine may have seen a window of opportunity open up. It doesn't need to take out Russian ships in the Black Sea anymore. Why not strike further afield then? What we may be seeing here is the genesis of a new Ukrainian strategy in which it takes out ships beyond those that directly threaten its territory. This could be Ukraine showing Russia that its entire navy is at risk. Don't worry about the Black Sea fleet anymore. Worry about every ship that comes within 1,000 kilometers of Ukraine's borders. Russia's diminishing naval power won't be done any favors by the SSO's October 4th strike. And neither will its seeming inability to do a thing about Ukraine's asymmetric approach to dealing with Russian warships. Defense Express suggests that Ukraine has again showcased how effective its drones can be against almost any weapon Russia brings to bear. Ukraine's lighter, smarter, agile and precise forces are inflicting a lot of damage on much larger adversaries. Now the Grad is among the list of asymmetric victims. This is a ship that Daigle suggests may have cost Russia around $70 million to build, which is a lot of money to lose to a Ukrainian drone or missile that would have cost a fraction of that amount. If it was indeed the $200,000 Lyuchi drone that just took out the Grad, for instance, that represents a 350 times return on investment for Ukraine. Not bad for a country that barely has a navy of its own. And that brings us back to the point we raised earlier in the video, the Grad being new. This vessel has only been at sea for a couple of years, and it may now be wrecked thanks to Ukraine. Painful isn't the word to describe this blow to Russia's navy. Devastating is perhaps more apt, especially given the state that Russia's shipbuilding industry is in right now due to the West's sanctions. A lot of Russia's plans are falling by the wayside thanks to the effects of these sanctions. On August 15th, the Moscow Times reported that Russia's state-owned port operator, Rosmoport, has been forced to scrap a $200 million deal with the Onega shipbuilding plant for the construction of 2 icebreakers. The deal is now completely down the pan, with the reported reason being the constant construction delays that have hindered the project ever since Putin invaded Ukraine and the West began levying its sanctions. Remember the name Onega? It's the very lake where Ukraine hit the Grad while the ship was en route to the Caspian Sea. So the shipbuilding company named after and likely based near that lake isn't able to build 2 ships for which it would have received $200 million. That's bad news for Russia's navy. It means stockpiles of parts and components are already running so low that Putin's Arctic ambitions are now being put on hold. What hope is there that a replacement for the Grad is going to be built anytime soon when icebreaker contracts are being cancelled? Another shipbuilding plant in Russia is dealing with a crisis too. On August 18th, UNN reported that the Khabarovsk shipbuilding plant has been forced to lay off about 70% of its workforce. The plant will only be left with about 90 workers. Obviously, a reduced workforce means slower turnaround times on contracts, assuming that contracts are coming in at all. Part of the reason for the layoffs is that the plant isn't getting any new orders. It's not getting orders because there is no money or materials for Russia to engage in shipbuilding right now. We said in the video's introduction that Russia's navy has been left defenseless by the SSO's strike on the Grad. You can take that 2 ways. On one hand, that defenselessness comes because Ukraine has proven it can hit a Russian ship, and one that was actively sailing no less from a distance of around 1,000 kilometers. That ship couldn't stop Ukraine's strike. It's likely that any others that come within range won't be able to do much either. So Russia's navy is defenseless in the sense that Ukraine can hit at a long enough range to force Russia not to risk its ships anywhere near Ukraine. And on the other hand, there's the shipbuilding angle. When combined with Western sanctions, Ukraine's strikes are rendering Russia's navy defenseless by attrition. Every lost ship is one that Russia isn't able to replace right now, and certainly not at any sort of pace that would allow it to maintain its already broken image of having one of the world's strongest navies. Ukraine just proved that it can hit a modern Russian warship using weapons it has built itself over the past couple of years. Think what that means to the West, knowing that it has more advanced weapons that could strike Russia's ships if needed. Russia's navy may not be finished off yet. It may never be completely eradicated, but it's proving itself increasingly useless, even as Putin tries fruitlessly to intimidate NATO.
There seems to be a little bit of a trend with the Russian military right now. Russia sends one of its small units to take a Ukrainian settlement. That unit succeeds, and Russia declares victory. Flags are raised and smiles are all around as Russia believes it's occupied another scrap of Ukraine's territory. Then, Ukraine strikes back, and Russia loses in hours what it may have taken days or even weeks to gain. And it's happened all over again. Russia declared victory in Verbove. Ukraine flipped that victory into a crushing defeat by striking back instantly and without mercy. The story begins with Russia's claimed victory. On October 1st, AA reported that Russia's defense ministry had made the interesting claim that it captured the village of Verbove, not the well-known frontline settlement in Zaporizhia, but a smaller one in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, which borders the Zaporizhia Oblast and sits just north of the administrative border between Dnipropetrovsk and the Donetsk region. That alone would make the village a pretty major capture for Russia. Any step taken closer to that border is great for Russia, as reaching that border could allow it to partially encircle Ukraine's defenders in the Donetsk Oblast. The Kyiv Independent followed up on AA's report, adding that the capture would be part of a Russian push into the Dnipropetrovsk that had taken place during the summer. That push included attacks near Kalinivska and Berezove in late September, preceding Russia's October 1st claim about Verbove. Previously unoccupied and of little strategic significance outside of its proximity to Zaporizhia and Donetsk, the region seems to become a target for Vladimir Putin because his troops, frankly, are failing to take the ground that Russia's leader expected them to take in 2025. It's pretty simple logic on Russia's part. If Russia can't take the territory it actively wants, it takes territory that doesn't matter as much. If nothing else, it stretches the front lines and gives Ukraine another problem to think about. All in all, this represents a net win for Russia. It captures another settlement and is able to proclaim a small victory against Ukraine. Only, all is not as it seems with Russia's Verbove capture. That became immediately apparent after Russia's defense ministry claimed the capture, as Ukraine immediately shot back that Russia hadn't taken Verbove at all, per the Kyiv Independent. Only a couple of days later, it was revealed that Russia had managed to get its troops into Verbove. However, they hadn't captured anything. They were there one second and gone the next, as a devastating Ukrainian strike decimated them where they stood, leaving Verbove clearly still in Ukraine's hands. At least, that's according to the Kyiv Post, which published a report on October 3rd claiming that Russia's supposed Verbove takeover had only lasted for a handful of minutes before Ukraine's armed forces took them out. The Russian assault that would supposedly have secured Verbove wasn't an assault at all. It was a tiny team of infiltrators that had essentially managed to sneak into the settlement where they tried to plant a flag before they were caught. Russia may have managed to gain some mileage out of that infiltration, publishing a propaganda video showcasing the supposed capture of the video, the Kyiv Post reports. However, what really happened was very different, Ukraine claims, and Ukraine says it has the proof. In a Telegram post covering what really happened in Verbove, Ukraine's 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade was more than happy to share the real details. Recently, the enemy made a statement and showed a propaganda video allegedly about the capture of the village of Verbove, which is located in the area of responsibility of the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade. The Telegram post begins, setting the tone for what's to come nicely. Russia claimed it failed to prove. That information is not true. The enemy's DRG penetrated the village of Verbove to make a video of the flag-raising ceremony, after which the occupiers were destroyed by our units, the 110th Motorized Rifle Brigade said. The brigade then followed this up with a statement that its soldiers entered the village to take out the remnants of the Russian infiltrators, securing Verbove again. We call on Ukrainians to trust only official sources of information authorized to comment on the situation on the front, the post concluded, which is an important message for all Ukrainians to hear. Don't believe Russia's lies, the 110th Motorized Rifle Brigade seems to be saying. Seldom is what Russia says and what Russia does one and the same thing. Of course, this all sounds like one word against another. Russia claims to have captured Verbove, while Ukraine says that the supposed capture was just a bunch of infiltrators trying to get a photograph for propaganda purposes before they were destroyed. Who's telling the truth? One could easily believe either claim, so there has to be hard evidence one way or the other. There is. The 110th Motorized Rifle Brigade's Telegram post didn't just include a statement, it also contained a video showing what really happened to the Russian occupiers in Verbove. The video shows a tiny contingent of Russian soldiers attempting to hoist their country's flag up. In a heartbeat, those soldiers, with Russia's flag still in their hands, are obliterated by a Ukrainian strike that comes out of nowhere. The video then switches to a slightly more urbanized location, presumably also in Verbove, where another small group of Russian soldiers is trying to pull the same trick. This time, they're hoisting the flag up among the shelled remains of some buildings. The footage doesn't clearly show what happens next. It appears that Ukraine's ground forces attacked, seemingly with the help of drones, forcing the Russian infiltrators to take cover. It's clear what happens to one of the Russian soldiers, however. Hiding within the remnants of a building, he appears to poke his head out to see if the coast is clear. Before that soldier can make a move, there's another explosion. Another Russian occupier down, another failed flag raising. The video concludes with what really happened in Verbove. With Russia's flag-bearing soldiers downed, Ukraine's troops hold up their flag for a watching reconnaissance drone to record. The drone then zooms out to show as much of the village as possible. There isn't a trace of another Russian soldier, much less a full unit anywhere. Verbove was never fully captured. Russian troops got inside, and they were taken out long before Russia could claim or fortify the village. The video claims that 3 soldiers were taken out, though admittedly this footage isn't perfect. There are no timestamps provided. Plus, anybody who isn't from Verbove could argue that this footage could have been shot anywhere else in Ukraine. The Kyiv Post also notes that some clarification is needed on the footage before it can be confirmed as coming from the village. The Ukrainian open source project Deep State has Verbove labeled as a territory requiring clarification. Ukraine's 110th Brigade has criticized that labeling, stating that Deep State is perhaps amplifying Russia's disinformation operation with such reports. But what is wholly undeniable is that the video shows 2 instances of small Russian units attempting to raise their flag before they're quickly annihilated, just like Ukraine claimed. With Russia seemingly pushed out of Verbove almost as soon as its forces infiltrated, the question now is why Russia even wanted to capture the village in the first place. One reason has already been touched upon, which is that it wanted footage for propaganda purposes. Spreading disinformation, especially if that disinformation helps to fool its own people, is one of the Kremlin's most common moves. This is evident in every aspect of Russian society, according to the Government of Canada's website. The Kremlin controls all official communication in Russia, as is to be expected of most nations. But where other countries might use such channels to communicate the truth to their citizens, the Kremlin uses them to develop and spread erroneous or manipulated content through its official government communications, such as news releases, speeches, and social media posts. It's all about creating a narrative rather than telling citizens what's really happening. Verbove is the perfect example of that. It seems far more likely than not that Ukraine is telling the truth about what happened in Verbove. However, many in Russia will never see that. Reporters Without Borders notes that nearly 2/3 of Russians get the vast majority of their news from television, which is controlled by the Russian state. Many have internet connections, but this reliance on television suggests that the majority of Russia's civilians won't look beyond what the Kremlin tells them to find the truth behind their state's words. Even those who get a little more adventurous with their internet connections may find they can't find the information that will show them what's really going on. As Human Rights Watch reported in July, the Russian state has blocked thousands of websites that could reveal the truth. Human rights organizations and independent media outlets are the main targets. However, social media platforms often find themselves being banned by Russia, as do the web pages of politicians who oppose Putin. The only way to get around these types of restrictions is to use a virtual private network, or VPN, Human Rights Watch says. But there's another problem. Many Russians have no idea how to use a VPN. Plus, as with the internet itself, Russia is working hard to block these tools because it knows they could provide a pathway to the truth. Think about all of this in the context of what both sides say happened in Verbove. Ukraine offered a video showing Russia's soldiers attempting to raise their flag before they were taken out. While that video isn't perfect, Ukraine also doesn't shy away from admitting that Russian infiltrators, though few in number, managed to make it into Verbove. Russia, on the other hand, would show nothing but the flag raising, with access to other sources of information either blocked or routinely ignored by a majority portion of the Russian population that only watches official broadcasts. That is all that most average Russians will see. The flag is raised, Russia won. That's the message that Putin wants to spread, and it's what Verbove was really all about for Russia. And if there's any doubt about that, Russia has made it a bit of a trend to claim victories in territories that it only manages to hold for days, or in some cases, a handful of weeks. The Verbove takedown may be the quickest that Ukraine has managed, but it's far from the only example of a quick reclamation of territory. On September 19, for instance, UAY reported that Ukraine had managed to retake 7 settlements in the Donetsk region in a series of counterattacks. That amounts to about 60 square miles liberated. A further 66 square miles has been inspected and cleared of Russian troops, UAY adds. This is all territory that Russia had managed to gain during its summer push towards Pokrovsk. Putin made capturing that vital city one of the main goals of Russia's summer offensive. Pokrovsk is still in Ukraine's hands. Russia failed, and it's now losing the territory it did manage to gain within weeks of taking it in the first place. Russia, of course, won't report on any of this. It'll just share the flag-raising pictures in these lost territories and act like everything is going as it should in Ukraine. Fakery is just part of the Russia media makeup. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, highlighted that in its September 25 Russian offensive campaign assessment. According to the ISW, Russia has overestimated its territorial gains for 2025 quite dramatically in several regions. Kharkiv is the most affected, with Russia having inflated its advances by 112%. The ISW also reports a 33% inflation in Donetsk, a 5% inflation in Zaporizhia, and an 83% inflation in the Dnipropetrovsk region, which is where Verbove is located. Across the board, Russia is claiming advances that it hasn't made. Verbove is just the latest example. In reality, the Kyiv Independent reported on October 1st the pace of Russian advances in September slowed dramatically compared to August. Deep State recorded a 44% month-to-month decline, meaning Russia captured just 0.04% of Ukraine in September. That's the sort of information that the Kremlin doesn't share with its people. If they knew how slow and grinding the actual advance was, rather than the fake advance the Kremlin convinces them is happening, the Russian people might have a reason to rise up against Putin. Propaganda has a purpose for Russia's leader, and Verbove just happens to be the latest place Russia claims it's captured. But assume that Verbove wasn't all about the flag raising for Russia. Perhaps there was a strategic goal beyond the propaganda. Verbove could also offer a route deeper into Dnipropetrovsk, though that's a region that Russia has placed little importance on since the Ukraine war devolved into the attritional quagmire that it is today. Russia had bigger fish than Dnipropetrovsk to fry right now. Still, Verbove may have had minor symbolic or propaganda value, a quick win to show on state TV rather than a move of real strategic consequence. And by revealing the falsity of Russia's supposed capture of Verbove, Ukraine has delivered a painful blow to Putin and his Kremlin cronies. Ukraine just rained down hell. It launched one of its biggest ever drone strikes on locations in both occupied Crimea and Russia itself, dealing massive damage to multiple targets. This was an act of revenge for all the countless drone and missile bombardments Ukraine and its people have been forced to suffer for so long. Revenge for those innocent souls that have lost their lives and seen their homes reduced to rubble. It gave Russia a big dose of its own medicine, and the Kremlin will feel the impact of this attack for quite some time to come. The attack occurred in the early hours of October 6, with multiple Telegram channels rapidly sharing reports of fires and explosions in several locations. One of the channels tracking the situation was the pro-Ukraine outlet Crimean Wind, with its first post coming at 12:23 AM Ukrainian time. A powerful explosion occurred near the Saki airfield in Novofedorovka, subscribers report. Additional posts soon followed, as the channel received more and more reports of explosions ringing out in the area surrounding Saki airfield, which is a major airbase in the Crimean Peninsula. Once used by Ukraine, the base was taken over by Russian forces during the 2014 annexation of Crimea and has since been used by the Russian Naval Aviation Forces, who operate fleets of Sukhoi Su-24 bombers and Sukhoi Su-30 fighter jets, among other aircraft. Kyiv's forces have targeted the base on several occasions since the war began, like in August 2022 when Ukraine managed to wipe multiple Russian aircraft off the map, or in January 2024 when Kyiv launched Storm Shadow missiles at a command post in the area, killing a high-ranking Russian commander. Footage soon emerged from the scene, with the sound of gunfire ringing out in the background, but Saki airfield was not the only target of this attack. As the night went on, additional reports of drone sightings and explosions came in from numerous other locations around Crimea, including Feodosia, Yevpatoria, and the village of Andriivka, not far from the Kazha airfield, another important airbase occupied and operated by Russian forces in the Crimean Peninsula. Alarms rang out and Russian forces scrambled to activate their air defenses in a desperate bid to withstand the onslaught. Clearly, they weren't fast enough. With every passing minute, more reports flooded social media of explosions in various locations, and Crimean Wind continued to keep its countless followers informed and up to date on the events. At 1:50 AM, the channel revealed that a radar station had been struck at a military post near the Yevpatoria on Crimea's western coast. Minutes later, the channel posted again, this time sharing dramatic footage of a raging inferno in the Feodosia area on the southeast coast of the Crimean Peninsula. According to locals, drones struck an oil depot in the area, which was later revealed to be the Sea Oil Terminal, one of the biggest oil transshipment facilities in all of Crimea, with a total oil tank capacity of 250,000 cubic meters or more than 66 million gallons. Numerous videos posted to Telegram revealed the dramatic impact of this attack as raging flames filled the air and thick plumes of smoke blanketed the area. And just like Saki Airfield, the Sea Oil Terminal is a familiar target for Ukrainian forces. Kyiv struck this same location almost exactly 1 year ago, on October 7, 2024, as well as several additional times since the war began. According to the Telegram channel Dnipro Osint, previous attacks had already wiped out more than a dozen oil tanks located at this depot. In the city of Feodosia, one of the largest oil depots in Crimea was attacked, fuel and lubricant tanks were hit. The oil depot has been attacked many times before, but after the previous strikes, only 22 of the 34 tanks remained intact. That number is now likely to be even lower, as the size of the fires in the videos suggest that at least several oil tanks were successfully hit, sending countless gallons of oil quite literally up in smoke and making Russia's ongoing fuel crisis even worse. The attack was said to be so devastating that the glow from the fire could be seen around 20 miles away, according to Crimean Wind. The channel also reported that trains were being hastily redirected away from the city as Russian officials feared further strikes. Later that night, the authorities also shut down a major highway, with Crimean Wind writing, "The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations has closed the Kerch Highway, which runs near the burning oil depot in Feodosia." It's worth noting too that this particular depot is of great importance to the Kremlin's war machine. Its strategic location makes it a vital logistical facility in terms of supplying fuel to military forces along the front lines. Now, with fires raging, Russian forces are likely to face even more shortages and delays, weakening their frontline offensives and making it even more challenging to gain ground. And the night only got worse for Russia from there. As flames licked the skies above Feodosia, additional alarms began to ring out in Sevastopol, the largest city in the Crimean Peninsula and the home base for Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Reports of multiple explosions soon followed in several different districts, and while no further details have yet emerged, it's likely that drones dealt at least some damage to important Russian assets or infrastructure in this area as well. However, it wasn't only in occupied Crimea that Ukraine's weapons struck their targets. This massive Ukrainian attack also extended over the border and into Russia itself, with fires and explosions reported at several additional locations. Locations like Zhezhinsk, an industrial city situated east of Moscow in the Nizhny Novgorod region. There, the buzzing sound of drones filled the air, followed by explosions and a huge fire at a local manufacturing plant. More specifically, it's believed that the target of this attack was the Sverdlov facility, operated by one of Russia's biggest industrial explosives manufacturers. Local residents reported that a large fire broke out at this location. Despite the best efforts of Russian mobile fire units, who could be seen in some of the clips scanning the skies with searchlights to try and identify and take out incoming drones before they can deal any additional damage. This, once again, was not a new target for Ukraine. Kyiv's forces have struck this exact location before, most notably in April of last year, with strike drones dealing massive damage to two of the facility's production workshops and an overhead pipeline. Another attack followed in October 2024, with several dozen Ukrainian strike drones dispatched to disrupt operations at the plant, which has been included on EU and US sanctions lists since 2023 due to its involvement in producing bombs, anti-tank guided missile warheads, and warheads for air defense systems. The facility is also reported to produce chemicals used in artillery ammunition and other highly destructive explosives, making it a valuable and vital cog in the Russian war machine. It's worth noting also that in Zherebets, over 500 miles away from Ukraine, which shows yet again how effective Kyiv's forces have become in regard to carrying out deep strike attacks on locations far beyond its borders. With attacks like this becoming increasingly frequent, the Kremlin is slowly but surely beginning to understand that none of its vast territory is truly safe, and that Kyiv can strike at any time and in any location. Ukrainian drones also wreaked havoc in the Russian city of Klintsi in the Bryansk region, situated north of Ukraine just beside Belarus. There, residents shared reports of a local thermal power plant on fire, and once more there was plenty of video footage and photos from those in the area to prove what had happened. The news outlet Astra reported the situation on Telegram, writing, "A thermal power plant in Klintsi, Bryansk Oblast was attacked, local residents and Ukrainian public groups report, publishing footage allegedly from the scene." According to eyewitness reports, a massive explosion rocked the facility just before the blaze began, which may suggest that drones struck a critical weak point or large oil supply. In the wake of the incident, parts of the city also lost power. And speaking of power cuts, another one occurred in the Belgorod region of Russia, affecting tens of thousands of residents. Once more, this was the work of Ukraine's drones, which reportedly targeted the nearby Luch substation. As reported by Crimean Wind and confirmed by the region's governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov. Suddenly, after the sounds of explosions, power went out in the southern and central parts of Belgorod. Water supply disruptions also began. And for some reason, the Luch substation caught fire. Governor Gladkov confirmed damage to the power grid in Belgorod following the shelling. He scheduled an emergency government meeting. The governor acknowledged that around 40,000 people were without power after the overnight attack, with emergency crews on site to restore the supply. Footage captured by locals actually shows the moment the power goes out, with dozens of streetlights and lights and windows suddenly going dark, all in the blink of an eye. The Russian Defense Ministry acknowledged the extraordinary size and scale of this attack, claiming to have downed more than 250 Ukrainian drones in total, including 62 above the Black Sea, 40 over Crimea, 34 over Kursk, 30 over Belgorod, 20 in the Nizhny Novgorod area, 17 more in Voronezh, 11 above Krasnodar Krai, and several more in the skies over Bryansk, Tula, Vladimir, and other regions. While official numbers or statistics that come from the Kremlin can't be fully trusted, there's no doubt at all that this was one of Ukraine's biggest and most impactful drone attacks of the war so far, and there's piles of evidence that back that up. All across Russian and Ukrainian social media channels, images and videos show the full extent of the devastation, with numerous incidents of fires and explosions, with smoke in the sky and debris on the ground. The fires will demand huge effort and time to put out, and only then will the real impact of this attack be revealed. But it's likely that Russia will face massive repair jobs at several key facilities, with its fuel and military production capabilities both taking big hits. Ukraine's big revenge strike came mere hours after Russia had launched yet another devastating drone and missile bombardment at multiple targets, with a large number of drones focused on the city of Lviv, situated in western Ukraine, less than 50 miles from the border with Poland. There, 4 people, all of the same family, were killed, including a 15-year-old girl in the small suburban village of Lapayivka. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed it had successfully struck important military and infrastructure targets, but those on the ground tell a very different story, with the regional head of Lviv, Maxim Kozitsky, revealing that around 163 drones and missiles entered the area and primarily targeted residential buildings, hospitals, and civilian industry, as well as gas transportation infrastructure. He called the attack especially cynical given its timing, as temperatures are beginning to drop across Ukraine and local people will soon be relying on gas to heat their homes and survive the frosty winter conditions. In total, the Russian attack involved more than 500 attack drones and over 50 missiles, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It left 5 people dead in total, with others injured and tens of thousands without power in their homes. Zelensky also called on the international community to continue taking action, providing protection to Ukraine and calling for stronger air defense agreements to bring Russia's nightly attacks to an end. We need more protection and faster implementation of all defense agreements, especially on air defense, to deprive this aerial terror of any meaning. A unilateral ceasefire in the skies is possible, and it's precisely that which could open the way to real diplomacy. Comparing these two attacks, which both occurred within the same 24-hour window, reveals the massive difference between Russia and Ukraine when it comes to tactics and strategy. As always, Russia relied on a brute force approach, launching a massive amounts of drones and missiles towards disparate targets far and wide across Ukraine. Its weapons dealt some damage to important infrastructure, but largely focused on civilian targets, killing innocent people who posed the country no threat whatsoever. Yet again, Russia proves that its main tactics revolve around striking fear into its opposition and overwhelming them with numerical superiority. However, while the effects of its attack are tragic, as innocent people have yet again been killed, Ukraine has not reportedly suffered any major military losses. It hasn't seen military bases or airfields catch fire, for example, like Russia has. Meanwhile, Kyiv's attacks on Crimea and Russian locations is dramatically more impactful from a military point of view. By targeting places like the Saki airfield, Sea Oil Terminal in Feodosia, and Sverdlov production plant in Zherebets, Ukraine's forces are systematically wiping out critical pieces of Russian military infrastructure. Over the course of a single night, they wiped out a massive amount of oil, as well as possibly destroying aircraft at Saki and putting a bomb-making plant out of action, at least temporarily. This will all have knock-on effects and long-term impact. With even smaller stocks of oil, for example, the Kremlin will now have to draw up new plans to deal with this chaotic fuel crisis. Already, hundreds of gas stations across Russia have been forced to close. Prices for tanks of gas have skyrocketed, several kinds of fuel are literally unavailable in multiple locations, and locals are lining up for hours on end just to get diesel or gasoline into their vehicles. Every single time Ukraine's drones or missiles hit another oil-related target, like the facility in Feodosia, that situation gets worse. That's why Ukrainian forces have made it one of their top priorities to identify and take out as many oil depots, pipelines, and fuel storage facilities as they possibly can. This in turn has meant that Russia's refining capacity has been slashed by a whopping 38%, and the country is 20% short of the supply it needs to meet national demand. Attacks on military production plants like the one in Zherebets are also hugely impactful. Russian forces rely on these kinds of factories to build the bombs, the missiles, the drones, and the countless other important pieces of military equipment they need to sustain their frontline assaults, aerial bombardments, and other offensive maneuvers into Ukraine. When those facilities get blown up or set on fire, their output inevitably drops. That means fewer bombs rolling off the production lines, fewer drones, missiles, and other weapons for the Kremlin to launch at Ukraine, and that in turn means fewer casualties. In short, attacks like this don't merely weaken the Russian war machine, they also save Ukrainian lives. And that's the big difference between the two sides. Russia is all about dealing as much damage as it possibly can to strong-arm Ukraine into submission. It has no qualms about blowing up people's houses and bombing hospitals filled with innocent civilians. Ukraine, meanwhile, acts with both honor and intelligence. It has the means to do exactly what Russia is doing. It could, for example, use its own drone army to hit Russian towns and villages, committing war crimes while killing and injuring civilians without mercy. But it doesn't. It takes the high ground and opts for a significantly more intelligent and strategically sound approach, hitting the Kremlin where it hurts the most and taking out the targets that keep the Russian economy going and the war machine running. The logic behind this is clear for all to see. If Ukraine can deal enough damage to Russia's most important pieces of infrastructure, it will eventually become impossible for the Kremlin to keep the conflict going. The country's economy will be too weak to sustain the war chest. Its domestic troubles, like the fuel crisis and massive labor shortage, will become too big to ignore. Bit by bit, the war is being brought home to Russia, and people across the country are waking up to the reality of this conflict. They're feeling the effects as they find themselves struggling to afford everyday essentials or finding that their local gas station suddenly has strict limits about how much fuel they're allowed to buy. Those living in areas close to key military locations are also seeing the impact of Ukraine's attacks firsthand, witnessing the sights and sounds of drones flying overhead, explosions sounding out, and raging infernos bursting into life at nearby infrastructure sites. Slowly but surely, more and more of those same Russian people are growing resentful and frustrated that the war is still going on. And even high up the chain of command, officials, generals, and other high-ranking Russian figures are equally getting tired of a war that appears to have no end in sight and a leadership that refuses to make any adjustments to its approach. The pressure is rising on the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and perhaps it will ultimately become too much to bear. As he watches his country burn and his economy plummet, even the proud and self-assured Putin may be starting to feel the faintest twinge of regret for his reckless actions. Now, learn more about Putin's latest problems in our deep dive look at how Russia is set to run out of not just tanks, but artillery, manpower, and other critical military resources, and may be forced to wave the white flag as early as 2026. Or for a more detailed look at the growing levels of dissent among Russian generals and the wider public, watch this video exploring how even hardline Russian nationalists and military bloggers are admitting that Russia has zero chance of winning this war. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our trusted channel too, so you can stay in the know about everything that's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war and other significant conflicts around the world.